Late evening, Las Vegas, the end of the 1960s. The hotel lobby looks like a promise carved in marble. Soft light, muted footsteps, the smell of cigars and expensive perfume hanging in the air. Everything is designed to feel permanent, untouchable. At the front desk, the porter doesn't look up when he speaks. His voice drops, not from shame, but from habit. "Mr. Davis, I'm afraid there's no key for you." Sammy Davis Jr. doesn't react right away. He's heard this sentence before. Different cities. Same tone. Same pause afterward, waiting to see whether he'll argue or quietly accept it. A few steps away stands Dean Martin. He heard every word. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't move toward the desk, doesn't defend, protest, or explain. He simply removes his glasses, slowly, deliberately. And in that small motion, the room changes. The laughter fades. Conversations thin out. People feel it before they understand it. This isn't a story about outrage. It's not about shouting or headlines or fists on a counter. It's about what happens when a man with nothing to prove decides he's done pretending not to see. And how one quiet decision in a hotel lobby forces an entire system to blink first. Let us know where you're watching from. And we hope you enjoy the story. The lobby was too quiet for a place built on applause. Marble floors reflected chandeliers like frozen fireworks, every surface polished to suggest permanence, wealth, control. Shoes crossed the room softly, careful not to echo. At the front desk, a bell sat untouched, its chrome dulled by fingerprints no one bothered to clean anymore. Behind it, a young clerk stared at a ledger as if the answers might rearrange themselves. Sammy Davis Jr. stood a few feet back, hat still on, coat folded over his arm. He had arrived early enough to avoid a crowd, early enough to get upstairs, wash the road off his face, and breathe before rehearsal. He had done this hundreds of times. The ritual mattered. Tonight mattered. "I'm checking in," he said, voice light, practiced. "Name's Davis." The clerk flipped pages too quickly, then too slowly. His jaw tightened, relaxed, tightened again. Finally, he looked up with a smile that tried to be professional and failed halfway there. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis. It appears there's been a booking error." Sammy nodded, as if he'd expected exactly that phrasing. Booking error, computer glitch, miscommunication. He'd collected these words like spare change over the years. "That's all right," he said. "Happens." The clerk hesitated, lowered his voice. "We don't seem to have a key assigned." Sammy glanced past him, toward the elevators with their brass doors and silent attendants. He imagined the rooms above, thick carpets, heavy curtains, mirrors meant to flatter. Rooms he would sing in tonight, but apparently not sleep in. "Well," he said, smiling, "I don't need much, just a bed that doesn't move." The joke landed softly and disappeared. The clerk swallowed. His fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "Sir," he said, barely audible, "this isn't my decision." Sammy felt it then. Not anger, not surprise, but the familiar settling of weight in his chest. The kind you stop fighting because resistance only makes it heavier. He shifted his stance and caught his reflection in the marble column beside him. Older than the posters suggested. Tired around the eyes, still upright. In that reflection, another figure appeared. Dean had entered without announcement, coat over his shoulder, eyes already reading the room. He took in the silence, the stalled conversation, the way Sammy stood just slightly apart from the desk. Their eyes met in the stone. Sammy gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not now. Let it go." Dean stopped anyway, but not beside him. He veered left, toward a leather chair near the bar, and sat down like a man settling in for a long wait. He didn't look over, didn't speak, just crossed his leg and raised 2 fingers to the bartender. The clerk noticed. Everyone noticed. Sammy turned back to the desk. "So," he said gently, "what do you suggest?" The clerk leaned closer. "There's another property," he whispered. "Not far. We can arrange transport." Sammy closed his eyes for half a second. Another hotel. Another back entrance. Another quiet understanding that ended the moment the lights came up. "No," he said. "I'll wait." The word hung there, heavier than it should have been. Around them, the lobby continued its careful stillness, pretending not to see what it had been designed to hide. From the bar came the soft clink of ice in a glass. Dean took his first sip and kept watching. Dean Martin did not rush the moment. He let it breathe, let the lobby sit in its own discomfort. From his chair near the bar, he watched the choreography play out. The clerk's stiff posture, the way Sammy stood with his weight shifted slightly back, already prepared for a refusal that pretended to be polite. Dean took another slow sip. Whiskey, neat. The glass was cold, grounding. Power, Dean knew, worked best when it didn't announce itself. A waiter hovered, unsure whether to interrupt. Dean waved him off without looking. His attention stayed fixed on the desk. He noticed things other people missed. How the clerk avoided Sammy's eyes but glanced nervously toward the elevators. How the bellboy nearby suddenly found great interest in his own shoes. This place ran on appearances. Silence was part of the service. Finally, the manager appeared. He came from the back corridor, smile ready before his feet reached the marble. A practiced smile, wide, confident, empty. He recognized Dean instantly. Everyone did. The smile sharpened, recalibrated. "Mr. Martin," the manager said, extending his hand. "We're honored." Dean didn't stand, didn't take the hand. He simply looked up, pleasant but distant. "Evening," he said. The manager's hand dropped. He turned slightly, addressing the desk without quite looking at Sammy. "What seems to be the trouble?" The clerk answered too fast. "Just a minor issue with—" "We have a room," the manager interrupted, already deciding. "Of course we do." He smiled again, this time at Sammy. "Mr. Davis, there's been a misunderstanding. We can offer you a key. Temporary, for tonight." Sammy listened without reacting. Temporary had a sound to it, like borrowed time. "There are a few conditions," the manager added smoothly. "No guests, no gatherings, and we'd appreciate discretion, for everyone's comfort." Dean set his glass down. The sound was soft, final. He stood and walked to the desk, unhurried, closing the distance as if this had always been the plan. The lobby seemed to contract around him. "That key," Dean said, nodding once toward the counter. "That's Sammy's?" "Yes, sir," the manager said. "Exclusively." Dean tilted his head. "Good." Then, after a pause long enough to unsettle, he asked, "Where's mine?" The question landed wrong. The manager blinked. "Yours, sir?" "My key," Dean repeated, same calm tone. "I'm staying here, too." The manager hesitated. "Of course, we assumed—" "Assume less," Dean said quietly. Silence spread again, thicker this time. The clerk froze, key card halfway out of its sleeve. The manager tried to recover. "Naturally, Mr. Martin. We'll arrange—" Dean didn't let him finish. "No," he said. "You won't arrange anything yet." He glanced at Sammy, not a look for permission, but for acknowledgement. Sammy met it, unreadable. Dean turned back to the desk. "We're either all here," he said evenly, "or nobody is." No threat, no raised voice, just a line drawn so clean it couldn't be ignored. The manager swallowed. Somewhere in the distance, an elevator chimed. Dean stepped back, returned to his chair, and picked up his glass again, as if the matter were settled, or just beginning. Sammy watched him go, a knot tightening in his chest. He had hoped Dean wouldn't step in. Now there was no way out without consequences. The key remained on the counter, untouched. The request for a meeting didn't sound like a request. Dean asked for the general manager the way some men asked for coffee. Without urgency, without doubt, it would arrive. The desk clerk picked up the phone with hands that had begun to shake despite his effort to hide it. Somewhere beyond the lobby, doors opened and closed. Decisions started moving. Dean didn't pace while he waited. He sat again, posture loose, eyes alert. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked like patience. It wasn't. It was calculation. Sammy had drifted a few steps away, closer to the windows facing the strip. Morning light cut through the glass at a low angle, catching dust in the air. He stared out without seeing much. He'd been in this position too many times, caught between gratitude and resentment, between wanting help and hating the cost of it. He didn't know what Dean had already done. The general manager arrived alone. Older than the floor manager, careful in his movements, the kind of man who had learned to survive by never being surprised in public. He greeted Dean with respect, not warmth. "Mr. Martin," he said, "may we talk privately?" Dean stood. "Of course." They moved to a side office just off the lobby. The door closed softly. No raised voices followed. Only the faint hum of ventilation and the distant clatter of carts being wheeled down service corridors. Inside, Dean didn't sit. "I'll be direct," he said. "Tonight's show, does it matter to you?" The manager folded his hands. "It's sold out." "Press?" "Several outlets." "Sponsors?" "Yes." Dean nodded once. "Good." The manager frowned slightly. "Is there a concern?" Dean looked at him for a long moment. "I won't be attending the sponsors' dinner." The manager stiffened. "I see." "And," Dean continued, "I've already spoken to the producers." The pause that followed was not accidental. "What did you tell them?" the manager asked. "That either Sammy stays here," Dean said, "or there's no show." The manager inhaled slowly, as if measuring how much air he would need. "That sounds like an ultimatum." "It's not," Dean replied. "It's information." He turned toward the door. "You'll let me know." Back in the lobby, nothing had changed, and everything had. The manager returned to his office without a word. Phones began ringing, papers moved. People who usually never met found themselves in the same rooms. Sammy learned what had happened from a passing stagehand who stopped too abruptly and apologized for nothing. "They're saying the show might be off," the man muttered, then walked away. Sammy felt it then. Not relief, not pride, something colder. He found Dean near the bar again. "What did you do?" Dean didn't answer right away. He finished his drink, set the glass down. "I told the truth," he said. Sammy shook his head. "You shouldn't have." Dean finally looked at him. "You shouldn't have to deal with this?" "That's not how it works," Sammy said quietly. Dean's voice stayed even. "It does tonight." Around them, the hotel moved like a machine under stress, still running, but no longer smooth. Everyone felt it. No one said it out loud. The decision hadn't been announced, but the balance had shifted. And somewhere above them, dozens of empty rooms waited, suddenly expensive in ways no ledger could explain. Morning arrived without relief. The hotel was awake before sunrise, but it moved differently now, quieter, sharper, as if every hallway had learned to listen. Housekeeping carts rolled with unnecessary care. Phones rang behind closed doors and stopped just as quickly. No one lingered in the lobby longer than required. On the top floor, The general manager convened an emergency meeting. It wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. A long table, coffee untouched, jackets still on. Faces that had been trained for confidence now showed calculation instead. This wasn't about hospitality anymore. It was about exposure. "One room," someone said finally, breaking the silence. "That's all this is." The general manager didn't answer right away. He looked at the numbers spread before him. Tonight's revenue, projected press coverage, long-term bookings tied to reputation rather than contracts. "One room," he repeated, "creates a pattern." The legal advisor cleared his throat. "If Mr. Martin leaves," he said carefully, "others may follow, quietly. No statements, no accusations, just absence." Everyone understood what that meant. Empty stages spoke louder than protests. Silence from the right people could freeze an entire season. "This isn't the first time," another executive admitted, voice low. "We've handled similar situations before." "Yes," the general manager said, "but never with him involved." Dean Martin's name didn't need to be repeated. It hung over the table like a ceiling beam, supportive, dangerous, immovable. They discussed alternatives, delays, apologies shaped to mean nothing. None of it worked. Dean wasn't negotiating. He had already removed himself from the equation. That was the threat. "If he disappears," the general manager said, "it won't look like a protest. It'll look like judgment." That landed. Downstairs, Sammy sat alone in a corner of the lounge, hat resting beside him. He watched staff pass by with expressions that avoided his face too carefully. He felt the tension without understanding its full shape. That was almost worse. He had built a career inside rooms like this, rooms that smiled while tightening around you. He had learned how to bend without breaking, how to keep dignity intact even when circumstances tried to make it optional. What unsettled him now was that he wasn't in control of the cost. Dean, meanwhile, stayed out of sight. Not hiding, waiting. The absence itself became part of the pressure. People asked where he was and received no answer. That, too, was deliberate. By late morning, the hotel no longer felt like neutral ground. It felt like a place where a decision was being delayed only because its consequences were too heavy to lift all at once. No one said the word, everyone was thinking. They didn't have to. The general manager stood at the window of his office, looking down at the strip beginning to wake. Lights switching off, signs dimming. He understood then what silence could cost, and what breaking it might change. The meeting ended without resolution. But the balance was gone. And everyone knew the quiet wouldn't hold until nightfall. They found each other in a place the hotel rarely used, a narrow sitting room off the service corridor, meant for quiet paperwork and forgotten coats. No staff followed. No doors were held open. The noise of the building softened there, as if the walls themselves had learned discretion. Sammy closed the door behind them and leaned back against it. For a moment, neither man spoke. The anger came late. It always did. "You didn't ask me," Sammy said finally. His voice was controlled, but the control had edges. "You didn't even warn me." Dean took off his jacket and draped it over a chair that had never mattered to anyone before. "I knew what you'd say." Sammy let out a short breath. "You bet on the whole damn night." "No," Dean replied. "I bet on myself." That stopped him. Sammy straightened. "Don't turn this into a speech." "It's not," Dean said. He remained standing. He always did when things mattered. "You think I'm doing you a favor. I'm not." Sammy shook his head. "You walk out, they'll still be here tomorrow. I won't be any safer." Dean's jaw tightened. "And if I stay quiet, nothing changes." I've done that before. There it was. Not defiance. Regret. I've watched this happen to you, Dean continued. To others. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that I was just there to sing and leave. He paused. Every time, I hated myself a little more for it. Sammy looked away. He understood that feeling too well. You think I don't know the cost? Sammy said. I pay it every time I walk through a front door and pretend I don't hear what isn't said. Dean stepped closer, lowering his voice. That's exactly why I'm not pretending tonight. Silence pressed in again, heavier now because it was shared. If this goes bad, Sammy said, it won't just touch you. Dean nodded. I know. And you're still doing it? Yes. Sammy searched his face, looking for something reckless. He didn't find it. What he saw instead was resolve worn smooth by years of compromise. You're too far in, Sammy said quietly. Dean didn't deny it. So are they. Sammy exhaled slowly. The anger ebbed, replaced by something harder to name. Fear, maybe, but not for himself. Then don't disappear, he said. If this ends tonight, don't vanish, and let me stand alone. Dean met his eyes. I won't. They stood there for another moment, two men who understood exactly how fragile the evening had become. Outside the room, the hotel continued to wait. And the waiting was almost over. By evening, the hotel looked flawless again. Lights warmed the marble. Music drifted through the lobby in careful doses. Guests arrived dressed for celebration, laughter returning as if nothing fragile had spent the day cracking beneath their feet. Reporters checked their watches. Ushers adjusted programs. To anyone arriving fresh, it was another perfect night in Las Vegas. Backstage told a different story. Sammy sat alone in his dressing room, jacket hanging untouched, tie loosened but not removed. The mirror reflected a man composed by habit, not by comfort. He had asked no questions after the afternoon. He already knew the answer might not come in words. He didn't know where he would sleep. A stagehand knocked, voice light. 10 minutes. Sammy nodded. When the door closed, he rested his palms on his knees and leaned forward. This was the part he trusted. The lights, the timing, the music. Out there, rules were clear. You hit your mark or you didn't. You earned applause or you didn't. No keys required. Somewhere else in the building, the general manager stared at a phone that refused to ring. Ownership had called once. Brief, unhelpful. Handle it, they'd said. But understand this. If he walks, tonight won't be the loss. The message was clear. Reputation didn't heal quickly, especially not when silence carried names. 5 minutes to curtain, Dean Martin vanished. Not theatrically, not announced. He was simply no longer where anyone expected him to be. His dressing room was empty, his seat in the wings untouched. Word moved fast, quietly, and by the time it reached the general manager, panic had shed its last restraint. Dean wasn't posturing anymore. The phone rang. The manager listened. Didn't interrupt. When the call ended, he stood very still, then reached into his desk drawer. The key was heavier than it should have been. No sleeve, no conditions, no explanation. He walked it down himself. No entourage, no smile. He knocked once on Sammy's door and held the card out without ceremony. Sammy looked at it. Didn't move. For your room, the manager said. Sammy took it between his fingers, felt the weight, the finality. He nodded once, not in thanks, not in victory, just acknowledgement. When he stepped onto the stage moments later, the applause hit like a wall. Bright, loud, demanding. He smiled, but it came from a deeper place than usual. He sang like someone with nothing left to negotiate. Every note was precise, every beat intentional. If this was the last time he stood on this stage, it would be on his terms. Backstage, the manager waited. And somewhere unseen, Dean waited too. The applause faded the way all applause does, not suddenly, but reluctantly, clinging to the air as if it didn't want to admit the night was over. Curtains closed, lights softened. The audience rose, smiling, convinced they had witnessed exactly what they had paid for. They had no idea how close the evening had come to silence. Sammy didn't rush back to the dressing room. He walked the corridor slowly, letting the adrenaline drain on its own terms. The key was still in his pocket. He hadn't touched it since the show ended. Not out of superstition, out of caution. Some things felt temporary, even when they weren't supposed to be. The elevator ride up was quiet. No attendance, no congratulations. Just the hum of machinery and his own reflection in the mirrored wall. Older now, but steadier. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled faintly of polish and cigarette smoke that never quite left these places. The room door was ajar. Inside, the lights were low. Dean sat near the window, jacket off, tie loosened, looking out at the strip like a man checking the weather after a storm. He didn't turn around when Sammy entered. "They gave you the room," Dean said. "Yes." "That's good." Sammy closed the door. For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt ordinary. Expensive furniture, thick carpet, nothing that suggested it had cost so much. "Thank you," Sammy said finally. Dean waved it away without looking. "Don't." Sammy frowned. "I mean it." Dean turned then. His expression was calm, almost tired. This wasn't charity. Tomorrow, this happens again. Different city, different man, same conversation behind a desk. He shrugged slightly. But tonight, it didn't. Sammy sat on the edge of the bed. "You could have lost more than a night." "I know," Dean said. "That's why it mattered." Outside, the city kept glowing. Inside, the room settled into stillness. They didn't toast. They didn't relive the tension. There was nothing to celebrate. What had happened wasn't a victory. It was a correction. Small, precise. Just enough to shift the weight. Months later, other hotels would quietly adjust policies. No announcements, no apologies. Just fewer errors, fewer missing keys. No one would credit a cause. No one would tell the story in public. But staff would remember. Managers would hesitate. And some nights, in some lobbies, silence would work differently. Sammy stood and slipped the key onto the table, where it caught the light for a brief second before going dull again. "See you tomorrow," he said. Dean nodded. "Yeah." The door closed softly behind him. And the hotel, for the first time that day, exhaled, unaware it would never quite be the same.